Good morning, everybody. It's Wednesday Live with Connection Point Conversations and my lovely colleague as well and friend Thomas. So we are here today, and this morning we're going to be talking about anger. And we're going to be talking about what that is and what that isn't. So, and how it impacts our lives. It is interesting, like anger, it's not, well, it's a lifelong thing, isn't it? We all say, "Oh, I'm so angry," or "I'm so pissed off," or, right? And we all think that that's the normal way of being, and it actually isn't. Um, Anger is actually a secondary emotion. So we're going to talk lots more about that today. We're going to talk about how we can change that and come from a different place, how we can communicate differently, and just explore anger, which I think is really a very important part of our consciousness, communication, and how we interact with others. Because anger is secondary. It's not primary. I'm just going to let Thomas in here. Go with Thomas. So we're just going to have him join us. Hello, Thomas. Good morning and happy Wednesday.
Hello, Mia. Good morning and happy Wednesday.
Okay, so now that you're here, I have to tell you all something. I have a really blocked ear, and so it really sounds like I'm talking through water, trying to hear through water. It sounds like I'm talking through water. It also sounds like I'm trying to listen through water. So if I go, "Young man, what are you trying to say?" Please forgive me and have empathy because I'm having to wait to get my ear fixed. Anyway, and of course, you know what it's like. It's even different with headphones in, and I'm not used to those. Anyway, so I think you heard me say we were going to be talking about anger. And this is a really good topic, and I had some really interesting things to say about that just before we launch into having the whole conversation, if that's okay. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. You are the lead. You are the lead.
Well, I don't know about that. Maybe you need to be today, seeing as I can't hear very well.
What was that?
Yeah. Hello, young man. What are you saying? So I have a huge traumatic history with anger from my childhood, as a lot of us do, and some of it ongoing for people who are in relationships with really angry people. And so it's not actually something to really laugh at because it can be really devastating, even in the smallest forms. It was funny. I knew we were going to be talking about this today. And oh my God, there was an article, and I have to read you some of these because this will just take your breath away how funny some of them are. It was a post on what couples do when they're angry with their spouses. Now, I'm laughing at it because it's very passive aggressive. And as a counselor, this is what I would not recommend you do. However, I do remember my husband being mad at me for 3 months once, and I didn't know why. And he wasn't doing anything like these people are doing in this funny stuff, but it was afterwards like, oh, wow, like feeling angry or pissed off or frustrated and not bringing it to the table in a healthy way can be very destructive, because I went on for 3 months not really knowing why someone was mad at me and not talking to me. It was very frustrating. Anyway, but you guys, I think these were so funny. There's 26 of them or something like that, so I'm not going to read them all. But one of them was, my husband pissed me off, so when he wasn't looking, I poured water on the floor in front of the dishwasher. He's been fixing it for the past 2 hours. I love that. I thought that was so funny. So, and of course, I can totally relate to this one. My husband pissed me off, so I sent him a picture of the thermostat set to 72 degrees. I'm sorry, but some of these just made me laugh, and I thought I had to read them to you. So I'll just read you one more. I'll maybe read some more at the end if we've got some time. When I'm mad at my husband, I ask him to help me find my phone, and then I put it in my pocket on silent. I thought, who thinks up this stuff when you're mad? Anyway, so anger, I experience it. I have 4 sons, and trying to raise conscious men, and along with myself, because I was really young when I had them, I think that I didn't really understand that anger is a secondary emotion. It's actually not the primary emotion. So, of course, I still experience anger coming at me, but I will be honest. I've never experienced, well, no, I shouldn't say never. I've only experienced overwhelming anger 3 times in my life where I thought, oh my God, I'm going to lose my shit. And this is not good. And so I think I'm a little bit, I'm happy that that kind of scared me, being that angry. And yet I know a lot of people act out like that in very big ways. And that's so damaging to relationships. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm really kind of happy about that. Now, one thing I just want to say is Thomas and I are both counselors. Thomas is such a fun counselor, a coach around your shadow, all the things that we kind of don't know. He has a real gift around that. I am trained as I don't know what you would call it, an attachment therapist, but a needs-based and value therapist. So anger fits right into my slot of the work that I do with people around, again, being an archaeologist. Let's get underneath there and find out what's really going on. Because anger, being a secondary emotion, is absolutely a primary and important thing we need. It's when we need it to protect ourselves. It's when, and if there's a bear chasing your children, you want to be angry and get your move on. However, anger is really misplaced when we don't identify the underlying cause, and then we're only expressing it as big, angry, judgmental, resentful, pissed off feelings. And that's where I think the danger in relationships come. And I'm not just talking about here between you and your husband, or me and a partner, or my kids, or any friends. It's a global issue of not identifying the needs and the values underneath the anger. I was reading this one man who wrote this incredibly, really, really good essay on a lot of the things during the politics in the United States about the anger with a certain group of people, and he expressed it so well. He says, we're not asking the right questions. We're not asking what they need. What is it they need? What is it that they're getting out of this? And so I think that in talking about anger, it's such a human way of believing that that's an appropriate way to express ourselves when it's really kind of not. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And now was that? Okay, I think that was it. So we're going to move on. And Thomas is going to share some things. We're going to talk about what anger is. I've talked a little bit about what it isn't. It's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. Anger shows up here, and then all underneath are all the vulnerable feelings. Now, some of you may have heard Brené Brown talking about them in her book, Rising Strong. It's an amazing book. It's all about the process of working through those negative feelings you get when your partner pisses you off, or your kids piss you off, and you're going around going, I'm pissed off, and you feel righteous that you should be pissed off. And it's a really good book. So I love the way she expressed herself. She's got a really interesting way of writing. And even listening to her. So we're going to just talk a little bit about all of this. And I hope that you guys will get some value out of it. And as always, if anybody has anything they want to say, please put something in the comments, because it's really helpful. If you've got a question, maybe we can answer it, maybe not, but we'll do our best. So, Thomas, I know that we've been discussing anger because yes, and you were going to touch on that in a little while. So, what did you want to share with everybody today?
Well, primarily, I think it's fascinating and good for us for choosing to dive underneath anger, because ultimately, and I think we also want to be able to hand folks an opportunity to invite them to cultivate a healthy relationship with anger. And yes, in a moment, Mheyah, you and I, or you specifically, are going to walk me through so that people can see some of the dynamic around things behind or underneath anger in terms of how it presents itself. It's really not what it is, but ultimately I'm going to play, and this will be legitimate for you and I to be able to do, because it was something that you supported and helped me with. But initially, I just want to be able to say that some of the emotions underneath anger are fear and sadness, and not just exclusively those two. Fear includes things like anxiety, worry, and I think sadness comes from an experience of loss or disappointment or discouragement.
Mm-hmm.
And when I began to do work with anger, and initially informally, I had done some early on in the therapy work I'd done, but Mheyah, do you remember the shadow process and the anger process that Debbie and her team took us through in San Diego?
Oh, yes. I was in complete denial
Yes.
about being angry. In
Yeah.
fact, I left the
Yeah.
room. I'm
I
not
do.
angry.
Yeah.
I'm not angry as I'm stomping out the room.
And do you remember, Mheyah? Do you remember the reason why? Because we talked about this afterwards, and of course it was fresh for me. And I'll give a little bit more insight in terms of what happened to me. But do you remember the reason why you left the room?
I think I really felt not heard and seen in terms of my conviction that I really did not feel angry. I really believed that I wasn't angry, that I was feeling hurt and sadness and all sorts of other stuff. And so I really resented somebody telling me that I was angry when I thought that I was really in touch with what was underneath anger.
And what a great example I mean, and what great self-care by you to kind of halt that train, because it was quite immense, wasn't it? That process was quite immense.
It was yeah, big train behind you.
Big train behind us, right? That big push, and I think rightfully so. But ultimately, underneath the anger for you was resentment, right? Was some sadness, was the fact that you weren't being heard. So there's a great example of tip of the iceberg was anger for you. That wasn't what was going on for you. And yet with the leaders of that shadow process pushing you, you found that it was important to take care of yourself and step out of the process because you felt like you weren't being honored.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you brought it up because I'd completely forgotten about that.
Yeah.
I didn't even know we were going to talk about that today.
Well, it's
Oh
interesting,
my.
Mheyah, and great for you. And I really appreciate you being so vulnerable. And the reason I brought it up was because in the reading for me that it's not anger that's the issue per se. It usually is the behavior that's the issue, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that process was routed in really being quite exterior with our anger, right? We were to yell, we were to scream, we were to pound the floor, we were to.
Mm-hmm.
So as we went through it, which was exhausting, I think I lost my voice, right? Because I had a lot of anger. But what I realized was, and we'll talk about this as well, I didn't really get an opportunity to process my anger. I didn't get an opportunity to dive underneath my anger. All I got a chance to do was yell and scream, and it left me with more anxiety. It actually left me with more fear because I kind of poked the bear, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And mostly my anger was directed towards God at that particular time. So I came out of it feeling quite dejected. I felt that I could kind of unload this, but ultimately what I learned, it was the first big learning for me that, and I got a sense that there were things underneath it. It would take me a little while to get to those things, but ultimately the reason this came up for me was in a bit of a research that I did for our talk today, I realized that there were many that said, don't just be the big pillow pounder or bat swinger against something. That's not the way to get at your anger. Would you say that was true?
Oh, I so agree. And that was part of what I was railing against at the time was I thought, this is not going to do me any good. I don't feel like I need to, beat up a pillow or do anything like that because, of my childhood and all of that. I mean, I think I'd witnessed enough the destructive forces of doing that kind of behavior and it didn't serve me obviously. And so for me, I think it was just more that I recognized that wasn't something that I needed to do because I was working through the more vulnerable feelings around that. And I think that that's really where more the healing comes from. It's not from expressing it necessarily. I think that, yeah, maybe for some people it isn't. I'm not going to say that it isn't, but I'm just saying that wasn't for me. And I had forgotten that, but now that you're telling me that whole story about yourself, I'm going, oh, right. I remember that now. It was so long ago. And yet, wow, that I had forgotten. We'd done all that work around anger. It completely went out of my head. Sorry about
Indeed.
that.
And I'm glad I brought it up because it helped me remember that the one energy that I got in touch with that was really frightening for me was, and generally speaking, I think there's different types, and I found 4 different types of anger. The one I bumped into, and the one I was encouraged to express in that, was aggressive, right? That was the behavior. Be aggressive with what's going on, yell and scream, beat the floor, do whatever you need to do. And then I realized, wow, the one that really resonated for me was assertive. Was this ability to say to my husband, right? I'm feeling angry right now. I'm feeling some anger in relation to a conversation we just had. It wasn't passive aggressive, that's another form of anger, and it wasn't suppressive. It wasn't me backing off, not saying anything, pouting, and ultimately allowing that little mountain to build up until it kind of explodes like the volcano in Iceland today. But I realized, wow, the draw for me was around this assertive form of anger where I could bring some language to simply having that experience, right? Without actually being aggressive, passive aggressive, or being suppressive.
No, and I love that distinction because at the end of the day, it's about, you know, it's not being passive and just not being yourself or being authentic about what's going on. It is about empowerment. It's about being able to set boundaries. It's about being able to tell people what that is. So obviously you need to have a voice around that. However, a lot of us think that it's okay to feel that feeling. And the process is you think that feeling is authentic and real. But what's actually happened, I'm just going to say this right now. What's actually happened is an event has happened, just like Thomas has said with his husband. Someone has said something. Then what happens is we have an unconscious thought about what that means. We tell ourselves a little story in here. We're not aware of the story. And then it causes us to feel something here, which is anger, frustration, upsetness. However, it's bypassed the important part, which is the story that we made up about what that comment, what the event meant about us. That's always about something about us, what it meant about us, and the underlying feelings as Thomas has expressed. Fear. Hurt's a big one. Hurt, sad. You know, all of those feelings that are the more vulnerable feelings are the ones we actually want to lead with when we actually can have that conversation. I think going back to what you described about that coaching program was that I hadn't felt. No, there was fear in me of expressing anger in that way. It didn't make heart sense for me, and it didn't make intellectual sense to me. So that was why I stepped out of the room in a lot of ways. And it's interesting that we've just touched on that. It reminds me of so many things.
Well,
anyway.
anger can be so complicated.
Very complicated. That's the hard part. Even what I've just described is complicated because we're not aware of it. Yes, complicated.
And it's a healthy response, right? To having somebody cross a boundary with you. It's not the same as rage, right? It's not the same as aggression. It's not the same as acting out. Some of the healthiest bits of learning I've had, not just with myself and somebody that I've had an experience of being angry with, when I'm able to kind of dive underneath that and be able to say to my husband, be able to say to family members, I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling afraid. I notice what it does for me. It kind of halts that angry train that wants me to go into the behavior connected to it because that's what I was taught. But Mheyah, it also, and this is really beautiful, it also kind of halts the response I get. I notice when I put the emotion or the feeling I'm having and I take 100% responsibility for it, and it's not to my husband, you're making me feel angry. It's I'm experiencing anger right now. I'm feeling anger, so I'm owning it. I. He will just gently stop and become this beautiful listening for however it is that I happen to be feeling. And then I can reciprocate too. When he has that experience, he's really great at being able to own it as well. But I get to notice when another human being says to me that they're feeling a particular way, all of a sudden the notion of wanting to be right, wanting to make them wrong, wanting to make them feel bad or shame them, it just stops. It's really quite beautiful.
Well, I think that that's probably one of the most important things is that when we're in a conversation with anybody, that when you hear an I feeling statement, somebody's aware enough about whatever it is that they're feeling is that's your cue. That's our cue to go quiet,
It's
be,
very true. One of
be
the, and I'm
calm,
yeah, big calm. Yeah,
ask, just
yeah,
wait,
beautiful. Huh? Yes.
listen, be curious, ask some good questions if necessary. And I think that that's a really important thing. I didn't mean
And
to interrupt you. Sorry.
oh no, that's fine. Thank you. This is, I mean, it seems kind of funny that angry is exciting, but anger is exciting, but it is exciting because I think we're really challenged. Let me own it. I can be really challenged. And when I employ, right, this remembering for myself, these things that I've learned, but I was going to ask you, amidst that calm, so you get a response from a client that you're working with, in the midst of that calm that you choose to be, what would be the question that you would ask that client when you notice that they're in that energy of anger? What might be the question that you would ask them to invite them to go a little bit deeper?
That's interesting because it's a bit of a process, isn't it? So you have to kind of work with the anger first. So you kind of go, okay, well, what do what's that like? Tell me about feeling angry. And it isn't until we've gotten the energy of that out first that I can then start to ask some questions about.
Got it.
So for me, and leading into what you've just asked, anger is a barometer. So I'll work with I work with anybody, even my friends, if they're upset or angry. It's a barometer. So if you're feeling that anger, it's your clue. Okay. Usually there's something being compromised. You're hurt, you're sad. All those
Mm-hmm.
things we've said. But it's a barometer for you to recognize, for me to recognize, you to recognize that something has been compromised, whether it's a need, something we need, was compromised, something we really value. And there's a million different values. There's the 9 essential ones, and
Yeah.
safety and security and fear around not being loved, and all of those things that come up for us when we're, the big question, are you there for me, is one of the big underlying things that creates a lot of anger in people if they're not getting that need met. And our principles. So we all have principles and we all have values and needs. If we don't know what those are, then having a coach or a counselor helps you to identify what those are. And most people go, when I've asked a few questions, and I'm trying to think of what they are now. Maybe I'll ask you some later when we go through the process. Although I'm sure it'll be simple with you because you're very conscious and aware of what is going on for you. But when we get to that point, usually and they go, oh, right, I really need la 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 la. When they really clue in to something they need. Now, I'm not talking about how we usually use the word need in terms of neediness. I'm talking about in the terms of what we need and what it is that how that was compromised. What was it that someone said the other day to me? I just really need you to. I just really need this other person. Need you to wait. I need you to wait. And it was about sort of that collaboration, being heard, appreciation for what that person has in terms of the value of what they're going to say, respect around what they need versus my need, and so I think that it sounds complicated, and I think sometimes it really is. But when you can get to the point of what it is, excuse me, underneath with your needs, a value or a principle, then you can move then forward, being able to say, I feel because, and we'll go into more about the process of expressing something that's like angry, but you've chunked it down a little bit into a different form. So we'll go through that. But and you know what? It's really hard. I'm always sort of in the moment with my clients, and each question has to suit the time and the place with the client. But I think the main important thing is being with that anger at first, because it needs compassion. It needs some empathy. It needs some care and tenderness is what the anger needs first, because you and I and other people can recognize that is a very sensitive. It's only the tip of the iceberg of some very vulnerable, sensitive places. So I work with the anger first. And then it emerges what it is they need, what it is they want. And you said something a few minutes ago, which was the lost hope or a lost dream. And I think that that's a big part of for us, that when we had a hope or a desire of some sort and it didn't come to fruition with someone, it could be even a really simple thing. It can bring up those other feelings of vulnerability, loss, fear, anxiety, and then anger is the thing, because it's a protective emotion. So anger is a protective emotion. It's not inappropriate. We just don't want to act on it in a negative way.
That's really true, Mheyah. And as you were talking about how it is that you would hold and make room and really honor the anger that might come up for you in a client, it reminds me of me doing a similar thing with my clients as well from a coaching perspective, because oftentimes it might be the first time that a client gets in touch with anger. And they may have learned that, they're not a good little boy or a good little girl from their parents. If they express anger, it's bad. They've got a story connected to it. And if we can make room with compassion, if we can welcome it, if we can kind of normalize it, as opposed to, oh my God, I see that you're angry here. We don't want to go there, right? Obviously not a good thing from a counseling or coaching perspective. But you remind me that I can be angry with somebody and have a reasonable conversation without raising my voice, without the behavior that is inappropriate. And you just helped me remember that I think the safety that's created for our clients is this notion of us being welcoming of whatever happens to come up, particular anger, because the problem is we don't know the template for our angers in terms of how it is that they've learned about it, right? We don't know that. And I'll share the template that I learned anger was through violence.
Yes.
Right? Dad was an alcoholic. He was really violent with mom. Older siblings got engaged in that whole really unhealthy mix. And of course, I would witness as a little boy. And essentially the lesson I learned was you expressed anger by throwing people across a room. You express anger by punching. You express anger through violence. So as I became an adult, I became really uncomfortable because I made a statement. I actually made an intention with myself that I would never be hit or hit anybody in my lifetime. And that's still true today. But I realized what I was beginning to be uncomfortable with as I garnered the sense of a little bit more of a conscious adult was I didn't quite know how to be with anger. So I jumped into my first gay relationship in 1988. A beautiful man is still in my life today of 33 years. And he and I were having an argument about something. And we were in a second bedroom, which was kind of an art studio. And Mheyah, I really felt, and of course I said to him at that particular time, right, and we had conversations about our backgrounds and anger, but this conversation wasn't going very well. It got heated. My voice got elevated. And Mheyah, what I did was I picked up a set of keys and I threw it across the room and it smashed into the wall. We both stopped in our tracks because I realized there was the beginning of an expression of anger that I was taught. My partner at that time just stopped. He took a breath. He actually left the room, which was really smart. And then we began to have a conversation about that. And of course, I was so distraught because I'd made this vow that I would never be like my father. I would never express anger that way. And we left the chip in the drywall as a real somber reminder about how out of hand something can get if you don't begin to examine who your teachers were and what it was they taught you. In this particular case, I was taught as a little guy that anger was expressed loud and violent. And as much as I intended it was going to be different for me, I hadn't really done the work yet. And there it was. The keys was representative of the possibility of chucking him across the room. And of course, that never happened, right? That's never happened in any relationship. But it was so frightening to me, Mheyah, that I really began to dive into anger and get underneath it and get a better sense of that.
Oh, and I just really, really want to honor that story because I know that there are times when people have come through such traumatic events as children that we can let ourselves down when we're committed to doing it differently. And that was a very similar, I have a very similar background in terms of anger being expressed violently, usually towards us as kids, my brother and I. And it does, it you either grow up and continue that behavior, or you become committed to doing it differently. And I know that that's probably one of the reasons that anger has scared me, is because I
Mm,
would never want to express it that way,
yes.
as my mom did, being an alcoholic as well, and
Yes.
bipolar is my guess now that I'm a therapist, but not diagnosed back then. So yeah, so I really get that, and a lot of people still believe that that's the right way to do it. Now, the other thing that's coming up as you're talking is, I'm of course I'm thinking anger shows up in all sorts of different ways. It shows up as defensiveness. It shows up as judgment. It's, and I'm thinking, ooh, I think I've been engaging in a little bit of judgment lately. but if I were to think of that, I could say quite easily, where I judge, where I'm defensive, there's probably some anger and my needs not being met around certain things as well. So again, those things come up even on an everyday way, in an everyday way. So it's kind of in everyday situations. So it is kind of being conscious of that continually, and then working through this process. I think that I is how I learned to feel my anger. Okay, I recognize that. Like I'm just saying, I just did. Um, and okay, so what do I need to do about that? What does that really mean? What's the meaning behind this? If I'm going to
Mm,
say, oh, this situation is pissing me off, or it sounds light, but it creates stress, it creates anxiety, it creates where you're not involved in being part of the solution. So,
that's a great point, Mia. That would be a great point.
yes.
Do you use another barometer for yourself to get a sense of the presence of anger? Is there a barometer that you use for you to get a sense of anger being able to manifest or emanate from you?
Well, yes, physically.
Oh, good. That's
Physically,
great.
absolutely. I
Yes,
think that's probably what you were looking at.
I
Anger you
was.
can
Yes.
feel, and you can feel it in different places. So it, depending on what the need is being compromised, is my experience. So if it's something where I'm really really angry, and I'm afraid to express myself, I'm going to feel it right here.
Mhm.
If it's a heart wound where I'm just feeling so hurt that the way I've been treated in some way, and I have to work through that, because I know it's not about me and I'm not going to take it personally. So there's lots going on, but I feel that more in my chest. If there's a feeling of judgment and disgust, or that kind of pissed offness, I feel it kind of in more in my gut. So I don't know. I don't know what everybody else's experience is, but that's kind of mine. So I do use my body as a barometer. Your body never lies. Your
Boy, Mia,
body never lies.
it's so funny. I was going to follow up your comment with your body never
Never lies.
lies. And
So
I used,
guys, yeah,
I use the
listen to
same
it.
barometer. Listen to your body because it never lies and it always wins.
Yes, this is
It
true.
always
And it's always
wins.
going to come back to that. Now,
Absolutely.
now, what's very frustrating, okay, this is like the most frustrating thing to me. This is my other barometer, is that when in conflict of any sort, when I feel somebody's I don't do this with clients, but if it's someone I love and they're like expressing their anger, and I'm just sitting there and thinking, oh, okie dokie, we're going to have to wait for this to pass, I always start to cry.
Oh.
if I feel if I feel angry or misunderstood or unappreciated, or any of those sorts of things that are actually anger, frustration, I always cry. It's an incredible release, but it's my clue. Okay, you're feeling some really big shit here. Uh, but so I let myself, because it's actually an expression of my what happened as a child. So when my mom was really angry, and I couldn't be empowered back, obviously, as a little person, if there was glass being broken, things being broken, people being hit, um, I just learned that my way of coping to get to the other side, being more conscious, more aware, more healthy, more empathic, more empowered for myself, I cry. It's so frustrating to my boys.
Oh, I bet. And Mia, was Mom the architect of that teaching for you? Did she also cry?
No,
She didn't, huh?
no, it came literally from my body's natural way to release big feelings.
I understand. Wow. Can I
Mm-hmm.
share something that I discovered in my work around committing to be an anti-racist? There's this dynamic, and I want to be really careful how I broach this because I'm not going to make this about you, but there's this dynamic, and it's called white women tears. And in the
Mm.
anti-racist movement, it's actually used by white women to change the attention. So lots of examples by both Ibram Kendi, by who's the other author? White Fragility. You're reading that book. I'm reading that book. Her name escaped me. But essentially, she, in her around supremacy, but diversity training, she said there were so many circumstances where a white woman had made, and not always just a white woman, but in relation to what we're talking about, the white woman's tears, made a comment that was not appropriate, was challenged, began to cry, and the dynamic set it up so that the room, and of course, it was called out because there were people of color in the room, but the white woman started to cry. It changed the dynamic. All of a sudden, the room came to her aid, and the person who was offended by it, usually a black person, was kind of left in the cold and intimated that they were the bad person for making this white woman cry.
Oh, wow. No, I
So
always
it was,
take, yes, I
no,
understand
I know
exactly
you
what
you
you're
weren't,
saying.
yeah,
No, I really get it though. Like I can
okay.
see I can see that dynamic, of course, in a big, sort of, way like that. Yeah, I think, and I get what you're saying. I think what I always try to do is to say, like, I actually try to take responsibility for that. That's actually a normal physical
Yes.
response for me, and not let it become about me in that way. And so, but I hear what you're saying. I think that people can then want to make the focus about them rather than the other person who's actually. Yeah, I get that totally, because
Okay,
we
good.
don't want to do that. So I always take responsibility for that and say that.
Oh, and
Someone's asked a question
go ahead.
too.
Go ahead.
Well, and I don't want to go. So, hi, hi, Janet. This is my niece. So she's saying, is there also ways where you can approach your kid's anchor towards you, and not take it on and get angry back or taking it personally? Oh my God, this is such a good question. Oh, I love this question, and I'll tell you why, Janet. Listening to anyone and not getting angry or upset, and I cry too. Well, at least I'm not the only one. No, I really get that, because I think for a lot of people, like we're just describing, Janet, we got a lot of history with anger and big feelings coming at us from people, and as Thomas has said, there's the instances where people use it to manipulate, but it's also I think it's a normal human response to just cry. But what I'm loving about her question, Thomas, is this is really good, is about kids' anger. I saw this incredible video of this incredible parent who uh, did what a counselor did. He wasn't a counselor, but he did it naturally, which was he just was with his kids' big feelings. Now, what I'm watching my kids do with their children is they're teaching one of my granddaughters to put her hands up when she's angry and upset, and to just say, and she knows now, she's only 19 months old, breathe. So they're teaching her to breathe when she's got big feelings. They don't deny her big feelings. And then they bring her back down to a place of calm. And then they talk about it. So it's hard not to take these things personally, because kids' anger is always directed at the parent. It's like, you're doing this and you're doing that, but there is really some value in this, I think, Janet. I know you can appreciate this in teaching our children, our young people, that it's okay to have the big feelings, that you don't act on the big feelings. You have to take responsibility and be with them. So really our jobs as parents is to be with them in those difficult times, because they're actually frightening. It's actually frightening to be like that.
Yes.
And of course, trying to hang on to ourselves and not get angry back. I think it's normal as a parent, if we feel like we're losing control of our kids, or we're losing control of the situation, or we're rushing around, we want to get angry to get people to do what we want them to do. However, we need to teach our children how to manage how to manage anger differently. And that's a big conversation. And Thomas, do you have something you could add to her of that? Because I think it's a really important question.
Thank you, Mia. What comes up for me, and Janet, you're right. Great question, Janet. Thank you for asking it. I've been blessed with an experience of, and I have many nieces and nephews, but formerly, two now young men were in my charge many, many times here in Vancouver when I had them by myself, away from their two moms. And of course, not being a parent, there were many times, right, that these two young guys would become angry. And I chose, because the thing I most wanted when I was angry as a little boy, I simply wanted somebody to acknowledge that I was angry. Yeah. And for somebody to be able to say to me, it's okay to be angry. Yeah. So most importantly in my experience is to be able to acknowledge and be able to call it. And for me, it was constantly being able to say to these two, I understand, or I have an experience that you're angry, and let me tell you, it's okay. Let me sit with you. Let's let it pass. If it's them wanting to kind of act it out, maybe that aggressiveness we talked about, which again is completely fine, but then began the opportunity, for me to heal a bit of me, because here I was acknowledging children when in fact I wasn't acknowledged for emotions I had. So it was healing on all kinds of levels. So to Janet, the key for me is, and I would imagine kids probably want it in the most brilliant way from the people that love them the most and they feel are loved by the most, just to be, well, actually, let me take just out, to be heard. Yep. So hear your kids when they're having that emotion.
Yeah. And I'm loving that. And I think that's really true. We don't sometimes have the time. We need to recognize it's probably one of the most important things we can actually teach our children how to do. Now, I have one daughter-in-law and one son, and they're brilliant at this. And my youngest son is brilliant at this. So if I have any sort of, I'm frustrated or I'm upset about something or and I just need to deal with it, my youngest son always goes, Mom, I really hear you're upset. So he says, so what do you need? What isn't working? What needs to be different? So those are the questions, Thomas. I'm coming up with them now.
What
needs to be different? If this was different, what would that look like? Like he asks me really good. It doesn't happen very often, trust me. But when it does, he's really good at asking the right questions. So
well, isn't that lovely that what he's doing is, because I think healthy anger kind of looks like this, right? It's noticed, it's acknowledged, it's felt, it's accepted, and how gorgeous of your son. And I'm going to kind of project on you as you were probably the teacher for him to be able to hold you in that way, but not in a dysfunctional way in terms of the relationship you have with your son, but how wonderful that he is asking you what's behind it. Or the big question for me that lives, and I use as often as I can, particularly in my marriage, is how can I support you? How can I support you? Because remember, that anger masks itself because anger and vulnerability come hand in hand. But when we don't choose vulnerability, the mask is usually hurt and shame, right?
Absolutely, 150 million %.
That's a lot of percent. Because anger walks hand in hand with vulnerability. And I found a great quote, Mia. It's from Peter Bregan's book called Guilt, Shame, and Anxiety. And he says this: when we express anger without additionally expressing underlying vulnerability, this will only build barriers. It is one thing to tell friends or loved ones that you feel angry with them. It's another to express anger towards them in a way that isn't frightening or threatening. We will accomplish more if we express anger in a way that emphasizes we feel hurt, we feel sad, we feel confused, that can invite the other person to listen to us and help us actually remedy the situation. So vulnerability and anger go hand in hand. If you are not choosing to be vulnerable by being able to say, here's the feeling I'm having, I think it only exacerbates what's going on in relation to what isn't being presented. Does that sound like a fair assessment?
Well, it does. Resentment builds, and resentment and not expressing these real authentic feelings, because they are the authentic expression of what we need. So the feelings are the expression of something we need. If we're not doing that, you're going to build resentment, disconnection. You're not going to have a good relationship, and I always say the paybacks are hell. So and we do it to ourselves. So we're gonna. it's already quarter to talk. I can't
Yes,
believe the
thank
time's
you.
going fast. But what
I
I
know.
really, there's something I just wanted to say, following on what you were saying, which was that even in the expression of the feeling, and that's the first hard part, is we might need to take a time out. If we're
Mm,
feeling upset, that upset that we're really overwhelmed with we call them big feelings in our family, angry, and those are the words you're using, judgment, pissed offness, you need to go away and take a time out. Um, and if it's your partner that's making you feel that way and they can't be there in that moment to just be with you, which is really hard to do when it's you, a lot of the time that real deep anger is expressed at the partner, then you need to say, I love you. I'm going to take a time out because I'm over the top and I need to really process what's going on here. And so that we then can go, okay, what am I thinking? What is this feeling I'm actually feeling? Is it hurt?
mhm.
Is it, and you can go through a list of feelings. There's a list of feelings. And it's hard for a lot of people to learn to identify them. They go, well, no, I'm angry. And it's hard for them to identify the vulnerable underlying feelings. So what comes up for me in this is that you need to do that to protect the relationship. If you can't, is to absolutely 100% take time out. Promise the person you're going to come back to it. You're not going to just leave it hanging and not speak to them for 3 months like my husband did. No, it's just a joke in our family, but it's true. He did it once. Then after that, you have to take it a few steps further. You have to figure out what it was that was compromised. So the feeling is another part of the barometer. I feel hurt. I feel sad. Well, what is it that you need? What is it you need to be different? How was that compromised? What values do you have that are different than the rest of anybody else's in the world, or just the basic ones for, safety, security? A lot of upsets and the feeling of anger is because a person's feeling a lack of safety. And with that person in some way, your relationship is at risk. And that is hugely scary for a lot of people. So those are really big, deep feelings that can create some anger for sure.
It's a great point, Mheyah. The thing that I always remember is that anger is never a solo emotion. The thing that usually exists with it is this
Mm-hmm.
notion of vulnerability, right? Of feeling
Mm-hmm.
threatened,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps guilt or anxiety. And of course, in exploring the relationship with that, the quicker you can get to whatever is connected to anger in terms of those additional emotions, the
Mm-hmm.
sooner you can work your way through the thing that is, like you said, tip of the iceberg, anger. But let's get here so that we can resolve whatever that issue happens to be, particularly in relationship.
Mm-hmm. So then the part that Imago, Harville Hendricks,
Yes.
when you work with that piece in terms of your needs, your values, and your principles, or any attachment, what happens is then you can tell the other person, this doesn't meet my need for respect or being appreciated or being heard or being understood. I have a real need for those, and can we do this piece differently? Next time, can we do this or do that? And then you make a request for, what it is you'd like, another person to help you with. As you say, how can I
Yes.
support you?
How can I support you?
How can I support you comes with about 5 steps: knowing how you feel, what it is being compromised, and first, when you express what happens with a totally non-judgmental, viewpoint, when you come back to the discussion. So there's sort of a process for it in terms of how then to repair a relationship, to improve the relationship, reconnect better, to connect better in a relationship, is to be able to do this without the anger, because anger is going to build and build and build into this huge snotty heap of resentment, and that's why relationships end. And
And I think
you don't want it
I
to.
think, no, I agree with you. And I think what you're saying, and it's brilliant, is that the invitation is to identify the true source of anger by naming the feelings underneath it. It helps us to show up in that interaction with somebody when we can get to what is not just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Absolutely. So
Right.
but there's the two pieces.
Yeah.
There's the feeling
Mm-hmm.
that it creates. That's just part of the clue. And then the second part, which is about needs, values, and principles. So even when Janet was asking about children, that's why that question that Spencer does, a lot of parents are learning to do, which is, okay, so what do you need? What happened? What is it you need? And I think that helping children understand their needs for respect, for appreciation, for being heard, for feeling safe, for feeling loved, all of those things. I think that that's like a skill that they can have for the rest of their life. And then teaching them, as I believe I've taught, my youngest, because he's been with me the longest, he's been like an only child, is how to express that. And the expression is really an important part of the process.
And wouldn't it be beautiful? And I think Glennon Doyle touches on this in her book Untamed, where the greatest gift you can give your children is for them to be able to see that you're working through stuff. Imagine your ability, because I believe this, my ability to be with my anger and do my work around anger has every ability for me to actually be with somebody else's. So for a parent to aspire to actually support their kids in anger, if they're not doing their work with their anger, it might not be as powerful. And imagine, Mheyah, some of those instances that perhaps your kids don't know that you went through. Imagine if in a safe way and an appropriate way they were able to witness them. Glennon Doyle says that's the greatest gift you can give your kids.
Absolutely, 100%. I really agree with that. I'm glad you brought it up, is that we lead by example. So even if you give into some anger, you go back to your children and you explain what happened. So you teach them, I'm not perfect. I'm a human being. I let my anger take over. What I was really feeling was really hurt by what was going on, or I felt really scared, or I felt really sad. And you say that to them. You let them hear what the feelings are. Then you go on and then you say, and I really needed to feel respected in this moment. I really felt that what was going on was, I'm just using that as an example.
No, I
Or, and you tell them that. And then you say to your children, it was a real trigger for me and I take responsibility for that. And I'd like to do this piece differently. How can we do this piece differently? How could we act differently? Can you help me and support me in that? What could you do differently? So you're also teaching them to take responsibility. We're not gonna make other people the cause, the blame, and take on the shame of our anger. And that's a really important piece.
Indeed. And additionally, imagine as adults, as conscious, as walking awake, we could take that same circumstance when we allow anger to really mess. Imagine doing that to our husbands, to our wives, to our partners, to our significant others, where we go and take responsibility and say, hey, I'm here to clean it up. I'm here to clean it up. Imagine the grace that can occur in a relationship when our partners can hear us say, I didn't hold that really, really, really well. And I'd like to walk through it and I'd like some support, but imagine the healing in that, Mheyah.
Absolutely. And the connection, I think Amalgo is a lot around that process of healing our wounds through the other, in terms of bringing that stuff into our partnership, being with a partner who can be with that stuff and help each other. That's part of the commitment of being in a relationship. And I really believe that. I think that's a really important part, is making that a commitment in a really realistic, conscious way, is that you're going to stay with that process. So in times where, recently, I've encountered, some circumstances where there's been some really big feelings, and what I appreciate the most is that the people that I'm in those relationships with stay with it, and they stay with it, and we stay with it, and I stay with it until it's resolved. And our hearts are connected in a better way, because we know each other better. We've both worked through the anger, the upset, the hurt, the wounds, all of that stuff, the triggers, and to come to the place where, wow, I really know you a lot better. I can do this piece differently. You can do this piece differently. I know that it's a really healthy part of growing in a relationship.
Really important. Yeah. And I'm conscious of time. I'm going to join you in that as well. But if I could do this, and maybe, Mheyah, we could make a commitment to, and I'll just quickly touch on kind of the 3 points that I think help people establish a healthy relationship with anger. And then maybe I can send you those notes, and I can post them on my Instagram as well for folks to dive into them a little bit deeper. But the first is, start by recognizing its masks.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Explore the message that you received, right? My message was, anger is violence. Mm-hmm. Right? Anger equals aggressiveness. Mm-hmm. And then finally, redefine your relationship. Remember, anger isn't the problem. It's the behavior that's the problem. It might not feel comfortable, But ultimately, if you begin to get a sense of, and perhaps use the expanded notes on this for folks, it's going to help people really lean into this notion of a healthier connection to anger. And then practice some consciousness, some conscious expressions of anger. Change the way that you've been expressing anger.
Mm-hmm. I really love that. And I think one of the things that was coming up for me, interestingly enough, when you were saying that was, I think I have a story in my head from an old story that if I wasn't loud or angry or emphatic or like really kind of being a big person, I wasn't going to get heard. That's interesting. That just sort of showed up, and I'm thinking, yeah, maybe that from in the past was definitely what was coming up for me at the time. Like, I mean, it's not now, but
Yeah.
I think that that maybe was true, that I had that belief that no one would listen to me unless I was, you know, being in my big feelings.
Oh, and from my experience in this lifetime as a man, I remember bumping into and doing some great work with a coaching client. But this woman and the relationship, the learned relationship behind it, and I'm wondering, Mheyah, as a woman, you can comment on this. Are women primarily, or girls primarily taught, girls don't get angry?
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of shame around that.
Yeah, and ultimately this woman has said the reason, Thomas, I don't feel like get angry, and of course we explored that, did some great work, and of course it's now one of the great bits of strength that she has, that she can use that, because I said to her, so when you get angry, what do people call you? And what do you think women get called when they're angry?
Oh, I know.
She said, bitch. They call me bitch all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And now she can choose to be angry, and she can say I'm going to tap into the angry part of me, and I'm going to choose to be a little bit of a bitch here so that I can actually get the result that I want, that I feel I really deserve. And I loved it.
But what's really interesting is that our version of being a healthy bitch is really just learning leadership, assertiveness, feeling empowered. And we're still telling ourselves a story when we're being assertive, empowered, that somehow we're being a bitch when we're not, which is interesting. It's like, so I think a lot of women, not all women, I don't want to use the word always, but I know a lot of women, we struggle with the balance of that feeling of leadership, assertiveness, empowerment, without judging ourselves for being a bitch. Because we're raised to be nice little girls. We want to be nice little girls.
And some of the most powerful women in my life, boy, they can express being a bitch, and I love them even more when they do that. And they inspire me, right? Because I too can be a bitch. And I pretended for a long time I was a nice guy, I was a people pleaser. The last thing in the world I wanted to be was a bitch, because the story was, they won't like me or love me when I'm bad.
Well, that also takes us back to the selfish thing, right? If I'm going to express myself in that way, I think I'm being selfish, or I'm expressing something I need. Anyway, that's a whole nother subject. And we're almost at the end, and we didn't even get to talk about your little angry emoji that I saw on my message.
Can you do a quick summary of that for folks?
No, because we've only got 2 minutes.
Okay,
but the quick summary really, I can't do it in a quick way, but it was interesting. I think that then my comment to you was, I think I commented and said that about angry, well, what's underneath anger? It sounds like you're actually a little bit hurt. And it was around a book. I remember that. So yes, it was around a book who did not express inclusion and around diversity, whether it was sexually or even in culturally. And you felt angry about that. And I thought to myself, so Thomas, what was underneath that anger? You do have 1 minute. What was underneath that angry emoji? You've got 1 minute.
Thank you. And I love that you drew attention to it, because it made it crystal clear for me, crystal clear that, yay, we should talk about this. But underneath it for me, Mheyah, was this deep hurt, right? That I couldn't see myself or my relationship with my husband in this resource that you sent to me to go and take a peek around. There was sadness, there was hurt, there was disappointment. And ultimately, it was this notion of, wow, will I ever get to see? So it was a sense of loss, actually. Will I ever get to see myself in mainstream? Will I be able to see 2 men that represents a relationship, 2 women that represents a relationship? So I loved that you gently and with love drew attention to the tip of the iceberg, which was the angry emoji. And that wasn't really what was going on for me. So thank you. I'm so grateful that you did that with me. Thank you.
Let's talk about this some more. We're going to get cut off.
We will.
And Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We love you all. Let us know if you need any help with anger. It's a really big topic and it's confusing sometimes, but we will be with you in your anger with love. Take care,
Absolutely.
everybody. All right.
Take
And we'll
care,
see you
everybody.
soon. Okay. Bye.